All right, up next here, I'm gonna go over the basics for audio and color correction. So let's go ahead. We put together an edit in the last video, and if you remember here, we got this nice little trip from Duluth that we did. We got some nice ice and stuff like that. Pretty basic drone footage. Now, what I always like to do with the music is that since we have this set up here, for the music, with something like this, I'm not gonna do a ton with, because I'm not bringing in other audio or anything like that. We're just gonna keep this super basic. So my general rule of thumb is that if, well, for starters, music is always gonna be mixed when you get it professionally music download like we did from like Soundstripe or any other source that you use it from. The audio is gonna be mixed to the best result for listening. So if you're not doing anything to the audio, you're just simply adding it to your video and nothing else, you could just leave it as is. Personally though, because I know with the sites out there like YouTube and stuff like that, they do change your audio a little bit. They tend to like bump it up a little bit or to match their own standards. So what I always like to do is I always set my mix to a -3 dB. Now, I know that's up for debate and maybe you don't even have to do it or whatever. I just personally do it that way so that I know, A, I'm gonna have that consistency if they do decide to change it, but then also in general, just bringing things down just a little bit is not really a big deal for most listeners anyway, and as long as the audio sounds consistent across the board, they're not going to notice that subtle little difference. So if I click on the clip, I can see I have all these things up here that we can work with. Now, a lot of these tools you don't even have to worry about. They're just basic built-in things, or if we're mixing with voices, then you might play around with them a little bit. But to be completely honest, I don't really touch any of these defaults that they have in here. What we're gonna do is there's two ways that you can manipulate this. Right up here, you have your volume control. So you can either drag this slider down or just simply type in -3 dB, okay? So that sets it there. Or you have the bar here too, that if you grabbed a hold of the command key, you can drag it and it goes by increments of 1. Now, if you did just grab a hold of it, you can move it around too that way. It's just a lot harder to get the number that you're looking for. But if you hold down that command key, it's nice and easy to get what you're looking for. And then of course I'd go ahead and let go of it and it goes to 1. So yeah, so we're gonna drag that down to -3 dB. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm gonna make sure that the audio fades in and out. So, couple different ways you can do that. I'm going to zoom in here on the timeline. Now you have these little teeny tiny triangle things right here that you can grab and drag across, and those are little sliders there. So that's one way to do it. Let's try that again. There you go, nice simple fade. The other thing that you can do is, if you remember the Command T from the previous video, we just hit Command T again. That works as well. It depends on the different things that you're doing. I would only recommend using the Command T if you don't have other audio coming in. If you do have other audio coming in, then I would definitely use the icon on the audio and drag it out that way and match it up. So that's your basics for adjusting that. So I'm gonna do that here, and in the beginning, let's see, do we wanna do that? Yeah. I don't think we really need to worry about it in the beginning because it does just kind of start, and it does have a little teeny tiny fade on its own there. So we can do that. Now, the other thing for audio, if we had more elements, which we can maybe do a deeper dive tutorial later, is that we can put in keyframes in the audio to bring it up and down. So say for instance, right here, if I wanted to bring this down a little bit, I can hold down the Option key, and then you see the little plus signs with our keyframes. And then I just simply click on the timeline. And now I've mapped out an area that I can move up and down. Now, the reason why I put in 4 versus 2 is because these act as little faders then. So then if I only put in the 2, it's gonna just dramatically drop. Putting in the 4 marks, it's gonna gradually drop. So I can grab in the middle here, and I can shift this left and right if I want to adjust maybe where that starts and stops. But then if I shift this down, and let's just bring that down there, see how it's already creating this transition for me so that it gradually pulls down. So let's take a listen to how that works. So still kind of abrupt because of how we did it, but it's a gradual thing. Whereas if we didn't have that, Let's just delete those keyframes. See, now let's bring this back up here. Sometimes when you play around with it, then the settings get a little messed up. So we'll put that back up to -3. So now with having only the 2 in there, you see that it's just gonna go from here to here. And it's gradually bringing it down, okay? So that's the difference of adding in those extra keyframes. If you only put in the 2, just at your 2 points, it's only telling it, okay, from here to here, do this, okay? Whereas if you put in the 4, then you're saying, okay, from here to here, go to here, but then from here to here, be doing this, if that makes sense. By putting in 4, you can put in your own gradual increases and decreases. And see now, yeah, now we have all this more that we can play around with. And you can really have some fun with your keyframing if you want to, depending on how you want to gradually do stuff. But like I said, for this edit, we're not going to do that. We're not going to be concerned about it, just showing you guys so that you know that we can do it if we need to. So like I said, we'll set this all to -3 dB. And then that's kind of it for your basic audio. There's certainly more things that you can deep dive into with it, and we can do that in future videos. But just to get started, just to have the basics, that's all what you really need to know. Let's jump into color correcting. So obviously what you want to do when you color correct is really in general, make sure that your whites are white, your blacks are black. Then if you want to get creative and throw on some sort of creative looks, you can certainly do that. But the first step is making sure that things look the way that they're supposed to look. So first off, you're going to notice that these look really, really desaturated, and not all videos are going to look like this. This is unique because of how I shot the video. So the first thing is I need to make sure that this video is being looked at correctly by our editor. So I'm going to tell Final Cut, we're going to go into our settings here. And then in this color space override, right now it's set to off, so I'm going to set it to Rec 709 because that's your standard. And then for the camera LUT, it's not really a LUT you're necessarily throwing on, but I guess technically it is. I'm going to tell it to be throwing on the Sony S-Gamma LUT. So for LUTs, for those that don't know, again, very basic overview, a LUT is basically a built-in color that tells the camera, hey, you need to change your settings to this, or it tells the clip on the computer, hey, change your settings to this. Now, most of the time LUTs work great, but it's important that you put a LUT on the cameras that you work with so that it's correctly being read. So now you're gonna see that it brings in all this color. So what I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, Final Cut, yes, this is log footage and I wanna look at it based off of this. And I only chose the Sony because this isn't a Sony drone, but I just know that it works with it and it'll look good. So there we go. So last one here. There we go. So now we adjusted that, but you see that it looks all over the place. So now let's do some fine tuning with this. So for this first shot, you'll see here that, you know, this is actually, it looks pretty good. It looks a little bright in the middle. Maybe we can make some adjustments. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to do Command 7 and I'm going to bring up my color correction tools. I'm actually going to hide the browser there too so we can see everything. So what I'm looking at here is scopes, and I'm not going to deep dive into scopes really for you guys on this one because that's just a whole other thing that we could really get lost in. What I really want you guys to focus on in this is this right here, our RGB overlay. What we can read from this RGB overlay is a lot. So the RGB stands for red, green, blue, your basic colors. And so what we want to make sure is that this is as white as we can possibly get it, because then that'll tell us that we're white balanced. But then also the 100 is reflective of our brightness, and the 0 is reflective of our darkness of the image. And so we want to make sure that we are not over that 100, because then that means it's overexposed. And we want to make sure that we're at least kind of touching the 0 or at least getting close to it. So I'm looking at this. I mean, the scope, to be honest, the white balance is pretty good to start with. So I'm not so concerned about the white balance. I'm more concerned about the brightness. So clicking on the clip, we are going to go ahead, and this little triangle up here, it says show color inspector. We're going to click on that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into our color wheels. That's what I prefer to work with for a lot of things. You can certainly do other things like your curves. There's times when you use that, or your hues and saturations. Again, just keeping this on a basic level. we are going to be working with the color wheel. So you see here, you have your global, shadows, highlights, midtones, and a few other tools that we can play around with. So what I want to focus on is I'm going to start with the global, okay? So over here on the right side of our global tool, so we're going to be adjusting everything in this image. This is your blacks. This is your saturation or the color that's coming in. So what I want to do on the global side of things is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull this down a little bit and see how now we're starting to recover some of that area that was blown out. So if we look at this, this is the before. See how it's a little too bright in the middle there, right in here? Notice how now when I pull that back, we're starting to get that detail back. Now it's not gonna be perfect because it was reflection of the water, so of course we're gonna lose some of it, but we're starting to bring that back. And in general, the entire image is starting to get a little dark, okay? So this is what we're going to do. So now this is where it's kind of like, okay, now everything is balanced, but now we want to start adding a little bit of our own taste to it. So I'm going to go to my highlights because I want to bring that back up a little bit, and I'm only going to be affecting the highlights here. So we're just going to bring that up just a little bit. And then the shadows, I want the shadows to still get a little darker. All right, so we're just bringing that down a little bit. Now the midtones, the mid-range area. This is where I'm gonna brighten up more. And the reason why I'm doing this is because I don't wanna blow out the clouds. I wanna keep the clouds. I still wanna keep this area here, but I also wanna kind of keep a little bit of the darkness and the moodiness. So I'm just trying to bring up some other tones here in the middle that kind of make that pop a little bit more. All right? And I think that's looking pretty good. Now the other thing is because there's a little too much red in the highlights, I'm gonna grab the reds here in the highlights and I'm just gonna pull this down a little bit. So it's very subtle. If you looked up in here, that went from having the reds up in there to just pulling it back just a hair. And then I'm gonna do the same thing in my shadows. Is I'm just gonna pull the red back just a hair, find that sweet spot, which is kind of right there. And by doing that, I'm bringing a little bit more blue back into it. All right, so as a whole, I think that image is looking pretty good now. We still have, we still lose a little bit of information here, but that's sun reflecting. That was the intentional how I shot it. We got our clouds back. We got rid of that in the middle, but we got some nice details down here. Now, let's move on to the next shot. So, looks completely different, all right? Notice how a lot of things changed. We got a lot more things going on. An easy thing to do to start with is we're gonna copy everything here. So it's just Command-C, and I'm gonna go to the next clip. I'm gonna click on that clip, and then I'm gonna do Shift-Command-V. That's gonna paste things over, and it's gonna pop up and say, hey, what do you wanna copy over? And right now, because the only effect we have on it is the color wheels, I'm gonna say, yeah, bring over the color wheels. I just wanna see what it looks like. So by doing that, I see like, okay, yeah, like this one has a lot more coloring into it. This one looks a little more dull in the blues, whereas this one pops a little bit more, okay? So that makes me be like, okay, which one do I wanna work with now? What do I want it to make it match a bit more? So first, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna look at this and be like, okay, let's undo some of my settings here. So I am actually going to just reset the parameter on everything. I wanna just start fresh with it because it's a completely different image. I just like to do that sometimes just to see like, hey, does it match well or do I need to do a little bit of work? So what I'm actually going to do is I'm gonna go in here again. Again, I'm gonna bring down the global a little bit because we're overexposed on everything. And as you see, as I'm pulling it down, we're getting some of those clouds back, getting a little more detail, but then it starts getting a little too dark. Okay, so we'll do that. I'm gonna bump the highlights. Actually, I'm gonna pull them down a little bit. I wanna see if I can cover a little bit more of the cloud there. Just the highlights. The midtones, I wanna bring up just a bit. There we go, that's looking good. And maybe just bring the shadows down a hair more. Okay. That's looking pretty good. And then I see in the highlights, the reds up here again, they're just a little bit higher than the rest, which with this drone, that's quite common. So I'm just gonna try to bring them down just a little bit, just so things match up. Okay. And then I think everything else is looking pretty good with that shot. So I'm gonna go back over here now, and I see, yep, the blues, they just look a little more, you see a little bit of it here, but what I'm going to do here is I'm gonna try, let's add a little saturation in the highlights. Let's just see what that does. Yep, and that's what's going on here, is that this one is just looking a little more desaturated, so I'm gonna boost the saturations in the highlights so that the clouds kind of match a little better. Yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. There's probably some more tweaks we could make here. I kind of think that, you know, maybe if let's try desaturating the midtones a little bit, just because I think it's got a little over exaggerated. Yeah. There we go. So I think that's looking pretty good. Okay. So then this next shot, since I know this shot is an exact replica of this shot, because see, remember we zoomed in on this one. So there I can just go ahead and say, you know what, copy and paste. That should be the exact same shot. So in theory, everything's going to be matching and looking good there. And it does. I think that looks great. I think, yep, everything's looking good. I was going to say we might want to see if we can just right in here, it looks like it might be a little too hot. So let's just try seeing if we can do anything with pulling in a little bit more detail. But I think that's just kind of, it's with the ice and that's just how it's going to be. All right. And then this next shot is from earlier here. So we can copy and paste that over too. So copy, Command Shift in V, and we'll copy that. So now let's take a look, just make sure, yep, everything's looking good. I'm liking how that looks. We probably could do some other things with it to get it match a little bit more, but I kind of like the fact that it's got that reflection, it's kind of moody. If anything, I think on this one I might bring up the shadows a little bit. Just a little hair. Yeah. Okay. All right, so on this next shot, it's a new shot. So what I'm going to do is we're just simply going to start a new instance. We're not going to copy and paste it over. We'll put in the color wheels. All right. And so same thing here. Globally, I'm going to just shift everything down a little bit and just like that. Let me pull the highlights down a little bit more just so we know when they're not clipping. And the blacks I think look good, so we're gonna have to move up the midtones a little bit. Just to get a little more pop in there. There we go. And then again, I see that the reds are a little too hot. So let's pull that down a little bit. All right in there. Okay. And I think that's pretty good. Now, what if, for example, we don't have as much white as what we're working with here? See, I have the advantage of that because we're working with ice, I know it looks white. I can kind of look at it and be like, okay, that's still looking pretty white. What if we didn't know? Here's what we can do. You're gonna click and open up your effects and we'll type in draw. So you have this draw mask here. We're gonna drop that on the clip. Now, if we go and we click on the film strip here in your inspector, you see we have a draw mask. Having that highlighted, we can now draw an area on here. And what you're gonna do is you're gonna hunt for an area that's white, or primarily white. You're gonna select it and boom, it cuts it out. Now we're only looking at white, okay? And if we look at our color correction software here, we're looking at the Rgb Overlay. What we can see, what we can deduce here is two different things. We see that A, it's properly exposed because it's not over 100%, so that's good. But B, it's pretty white already, okay? It's not perfect. It looks like there might be some in the blacks, like there's little tweaks that we could maybe make to it. That's not a big deal. If we hadn't already color corrected it, it would look like that. We see that it's overexposed, a little too red, but we corrected it and that brought it down. It brings out some detail. It's hard to see, I know, but there's little detail that we're seeing in there. So that's one way that if you have something that is just completely not white balanced at all, you can try that. There are other auto tools and things like that built in Final Cut. I would say use to your discretion on that. Some of them are good, some of them are terrible. Some of them have picker tools that you can use. It really is just a kind of a crapshoot. It totally depends on the clips and what the program is seeing. Personally, what I like to use is a program called Color Finale. I just think it handles a lot better in Final Cut. It is a paid plugin, but that's kind of how they built Final Cut, was that they wanted to put, to make it so that people can easily build and add their own tools into it. So I prefer it that way, and then I can kind of pick and do color pickers and things like that if I'm having some trouble, and it makes it a lot easier. The workflow's a lot better, but over the years, Final Cut has improved, so certainly you don't need to do that if you don't want to. So again, going back into this edit, I know this is kind of the same shot, so I can just copy and paste it over. All right, and there we go. So that's looking good. So then this next shot, clearly this next shot, we're way overexposed. So we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna set up color wheels. Again, we're gonna bring this down globally. We'll see that detail coming back in the ice. There we go. Let's bring the shadows down a bit more. Let's bump up the midtones, just get a little bit of those details back. Let's see if we can get a little bit more. But see, with this shot, because of the reflections and stuff, we did lose a little bit of detail, not a huge deal. Again, I'm going to, let's just show you guys, we're gonna add that draw mask on there. And I'm gonna draw right here, because I know this is white. And then we see here, so see, this is what we'd be looking at if it was something a little more refined. We see that the blue and greens are matching. The red is not though, so we need to get that red matched up a little bit better. So we're gonna go into our highlights, and we're gonna pull away from the red, and we're gonna bring in more green and blue. And we're gonna keep going until they match up, which I always like to kind of just get in there nice and tight and see, and about right there. So it's just little subtle movements that now we know, okay, that's white, because our scopes, we can trust our scopes. We know we can't trust our eyes. Different things can affect when you're color grading. That's why you shouldn't really be adjusting with your eyes, even though I know I have been in this tutorial, but I've been using the scopes too. And so that's where now we know, boom, we know that this is white, so we know our snow is gonna be white. It does look over here, now there's a little too much green, but I think that's more because of, with the water being in there, it's just kind of giving off reflections. But I know my whites are white, so I'm not too concerned about it. We can't trust our eyes, we can trust the scopes. Why is that? Our eyes are constantly making adjustments based off of where we're at. Like when I'm looking over here, my eyes are constantly making an adjustment because I have a light shining in my face, so it's making some subtle adjustments. So you can never trust your eyes, because your eyes will constantly be making those adjustments. For example, with me being in this room that I'm currently in, you can't really see, but the walls are actually red brick, okay? So because of that, there's a red tone being reflected into my eyes as I'm color grading. So if I'm just looking at a screen and I'm looking at it and I'm like, yeah, that looks white, I look at the scopes, it's probably gonna be leaning more red. So that's why you watch your scopes just to tell you what is white, because at the end of the day, every screen projects colors a little differently as well, and that's why it's important to be looking at scopes, because my screen might say it's white, your screen might say it's not white. So we look at our scopes, because then we can say without a fact, yes, this is white, and then across monitor to monitor, it's gonna look consistent. Whereas if you just did it on your own, you might have it where one monitor looks great, the next monitor doesn't look good. All right, so moving along then, so we have that shot there. I think that looks pretty good. Again, slightly with the snow, like it's tough on that stuff, that's a little overexposed, not too bad though. And that could be also our LUT kind of overexposing it as well. So for this shot, I know we have this here, so I'm just gonna go ahead and pop that on there. And I'm glad I did that, made a mistake. So I just did a quick copy and paste, and I just glossed over when I did this here, that when you pop up and it has all these video effects, there's an extra thing checked, because on this video clip that I pulled it from, spatial conform was on. So it went ahead and automatically added the spatial conform. Not a huge deal. I can just go ahead and go back to here and say turn it back on, but that's something to keep in mind when you're copying and pasting things, to make sure to look at it and that you're copying over the things that you want to copy. All right, so this clip, we're gonna need to make some more adjustments here. So let's bring this down a bit more, because yeah, look at how crushed that is. And this is one that I feel like the log is definitely getting crushed. So let's take a look at that, because look how overexposed that is. I'm 99% sure that was not overexposed. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna turn off the LUT. Yeah, look at all that detail we're losing because of the LUT. That's the problem with working with LUTs. With this drone, I don't have a LUT for it. It doesn't come with one that I'm aware of. So when I threw on the Sony LUTs, 99% of the time they look good, but in this case, it's clearly overexposing. Some of my other shots I felt like were a little overexposed too, but this was one that without a doubt, it looks overexposed, and I know I didn't overexpose it. So that's where you play that dangerous game with LUTs, because it automatically kind of clamps in different things on your clip. So that's why it was looking at it and said, hey, we got to overexpose the clip, but now I lost that detail. So I'm turning that off. And the other way that you can grade then, if you don't have LUTs to throw on there, is that you just start adding in the saturation yourself. So I'm just gonna go on this global counter here, and I'm just gonna boost it all the way. I think all the way is kind of where it needs to go. Now you'll notice here that the RGB overlay kind of changed a little bit from what we were seeing, which is fine. I'm gonna go ahead and bring up some detail here. Let's do about right here, and then let's bring down the shadows quite a ways. And you notice too that now the image looks a little different too, because we're not working with that LUT. It doesn't have the pre-built in look. So things are maybe looking a little bit different, a little greener, which is fine. I'm totally for that. And then we can see how well it matches. Because I think you'll notice that it does look pretty decent. So here now it's just a matter of kind of fine tuning of like, where do we want to be, where we still have plenty of detail. So now that we have that here, so you notice the difference? Notice the detail there because of like how the blacks are. So the LUT is definitely handling things a lot differently, but I think it still works. All we need to do here is then crush our blacks a bit more. So we'll crush them a bit more. Let's see here, let's try getting it right there. Let's maybe crush the midtones a bit more too. Just need to make it look a little darker. That's all what it was really kind of doing. So we'll go to this next one, and same thing here. The LUT is clearly way overexposing it. If I try to make some adjustments here, it's just globally, we'll bring that down. See, look, it's still just, it's clearly we've lost detail in this shot. So this is another one too. I'm gonna turn that off because I know the detail's there. All right, let's go to our color wheel. I'm gonna boost the saturation. Let's play with the global. We're gonna bring some things down here to get some details in. Let's go ahead, we're gonna bump up the highlights now so it kind of matches from before. Pull down midtones, get a little more detail. The detail really lives in the midtones for the overall shot. So you definitely want to kind of apply that based off of like what contrast and stuff you're looking for. All right, and so then in this scenario, I'm gonna go ahead because I don't think it looks white. And because of how this is looking, I need to get a stripe of white, so we're gonna go kind of right in here. There's a decent chunk of white in there, and let's see, yep, everything's still kind of leaning towards the red. And just kind of match that up. Boom. All right. Turn off the mask. All right, so now it's looking really, really blue in the water. So I'm going to just kind of play around with that so it matches more of what my other shots look like. Maybe let's pull down the saturation a little bit too. Fiddle with the midtones too a little bit. All right. So let's take a look here. And let's look at it full screen and see how it looks. All right, so there you go. I did see still plenty of things I want to be tweaking on and kind of working on. There's some saturations and some other things that I think I need to fiddle with. So that's something that with when you're color correcting and also doing your audio corrections, you definitely want to watch it, rewatch it, listen to it, and make minor adjustments as you go along, because you'll see things that, you know, this is where I talked about before about your eyes, see something one way and then you get away from it, you come back and then you're like, oh, that doesn't look good. So it's definitely good. Make some adjustments, watch it, walk away, and then come back and try it again, and then see if everything's still looking the same, and then also watching it on other monitors. And I also know that with the monitor that I'm currently looking at, it's not my best one for color grading, so that's where I know I can't totally trust what I'm looking at either. So I have my other monitors that I would be color grading on typically. So anyway, that's a basic overview of how to be able to edit a project from start to finish within Final Cut. There's a lot of things that we kind of skimmed over. There's a lot of more details that we could go into. So if you want more in-depth tutorials, please let me know in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoyed this and you learned something from it, and stay tuned for other videos.